Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine 400,000 years ago, standing in the middle of an African plain at night. There is no moon, no stars you could name, no fire, no light of any kind, just a darkness so total you cannot see your own hands in front of your face. Yet you are not alone. Something breathes in the black, something patient, something that can see you far better than you could ever see it. Your ancestors lived every night like this. No walls, no fire, no weapon against the darkness. Then one night it changed. A dozen trembling bodies huddled together for warmth, holding their breath, listening to the grass. Suddenly, the sky splits open. A dry lightning strike hits a lone tree on the plain, and in an instant, the tree erupts in flame. The group scatters, shrieking back into the blackness, except for one figure. Shaking with fear, the person turns toward the burning tree and takes a single step toward the light. Was that the single most important moment in the whole history of our species? Keep that image of the trembling figure drawn toward the flame against every instinct, because everything you are, everything you have ever known, starts right there. For the next half hour, we will travel back to a world almost impossible to picture, a world before cooked food, before language as we know it, before the human face, before the mind itself had fully formed. We will watch, step by step, how a flickering flame built it all, including you. To understand what fire gave us, we first must picture life without it. It was harder than almost anything you can imagine. Your distant ancestors awoke at the first gray hint of light, and they awoke hungry, a hunger that never fully left them. The moment there was enough light to see, they were up and moving, because every other animal on that landscape was racing them to the same food. There was no breakfast waiting, only the search. They pulled tough, fibrous roots from hard ground and chewed them raw. Gritty, bitter, stringy things that took real effort just to swallow. They cracked open bones that lions and hyenas had already stripped, scraping out the last smear of marrow. They ate berries, beetles, grubs, whatever a long day of foraging produced. The cruel part is that raw food releases its energy slowly and stubbornly. Their bodies had to run a huge, heavy gut, a long digestive engine, working around the clock just to wring enough calories from that raw diet to survive. Such a gut is costly. It burns enormous energy. That left very little surplus to develop the one organ that would later make us human, the brain. Nearly every waking hour, and a fair share of their strength, went into staying fed and staying warm. There was no spare energy, no spare time. There was only the grind. Then the flame appeared, and everything began to shift. The day itself, as harsh as it was the easier part. When the sun set, everything changed. Your ancestors went from being hunters to being hunted. After dark, the plains belonged to creatures with claws, night vision, and endless patience. Leopards, hyenas that moved in packs, lion-like beasts as big as a small car. They owned the night and knew exactly where the slow, blind primates were hiding. So your ancestors did the only thing they could. They climbed. They wedged themselves into trees or squeezed into rock cracks, huddling together not for comfort, but to survive. They waited out the darkness. They never truly slept. There was no deep, safe, dreaming sleep that we take for granted. They dozed in short bursts, one ear always open, jerking awake at every snapped twig or cough in the grass. There was no camp, no safe place to call home. Staying in one spot meant being found, surrounded, and killed. Therefore, they kept moving, always on the move, carrying with them a constant low terror that never switched off. Imagine living your whole life knowing that the darkness itself was trying to eat you. The night shaped more than just where they rested. It shaped how they could be with each other. Their groups were tiny, maybe 20, at most 40 individuals. They could not be larger because without a home base, a bigger group would strip an area bare and starve. So they remained small and mobile. Their world was almost silent in the way we understand conversation. They used gestures, grunts, and cries, and the warmth of a hand on a shoulder. But there was no sitting around telling long stories, no planning for the next week, no passing down memories of grandparents who died before they were born. Relationships were immediate and practical, about food, safety, the present moment. There was no quiet evening to fall in love, no long stretch of free time to build bonds that turn a survival unit into a family. Above all, raw physical power ruled. The strongest claimed the best food and the best mates. There was no story, rule, or shared belief strong enough to soften that. Strength was everything because nothing else existed yet, and life was heartbreakingly short. The average lifespan was roughly 25 to 30 years, and childhood was the most dangerous stretch. More children died than survived. A simple scrape that today would be covered with a bandage could become a fatal infection within a week. A broken leg was not a cast and 6 weeks off. It was almost certainly a death sentence, because a creature that could not keep up was left behind and then eaten. Picture a young woman, maybe 20 years old, already old by the standards of her world. She wakes, stiff and cold in the branches, climbs down hungry, spends the whole day digging, foraging, and scanning the horizon, eats just enough to survive until tomorrow, then climbs back up into the dark and barely rests. That was life. And yet, crucially, these were not animals. They were us. They were curious. They mourned. They clutched their children tightly, doing everything they could to keep them alive, fearing the same death that would come to them. Unaware of it, they waited for the one thing that would change everything. And the world they awaited was an ice age landscape. Across Africa and Eurasia, the climate shifted dramatically. Long cold spells, sudden droughts, terrain that could transform within a few generations. The planet was dominated by giants, massive herds of megafauna and predators far larger than any alive today. Yet fire already existed. Lightning storms ignited the grasslands, volcanic areas smoldered for months, and their ancestors witnessed wildfires up close for hundreds of thousands of years. This raises a great puzzle of human history. If fire was constantly before them, why did it take so long for anyone to grasp it? To answer that, we must discard the cartoon image of a caveman striking two rocks together. For the longest stretch, fire was not a tool, it was a monster. A wildfire is one of nature's most terrifying forces, a wall of heat, noise, and smoke that devours everything in its path and outruns anything that tries to flee. So, for countless generations, our ancestors did what every other animal did. They ran. Yet, somewhere along the way, a few began to notice something. After the flames receded, the scorched ground offered a bounty. Roasted seeds, insects trapped in their burrows, small animals that hadn't escaped. Warm, ready-to-eat calories lying on the ash. There is good reason to think early humans, Homo erectus among them, learned to follow a wildfire's wake long before they ever imagined controlling fire. Imagine the turning point. A wildfire has burned out, but a single branch still glows at one end, smoke curling into the evening air. The group stays back, the ancient terror still pulsing in their veins. One individual, perhaps driven by desperation or a circling predator, reaches for the glowing branch and thrusts it outward. The predator retreats. The others, startled at first, slowly and cautiously return, having just witnessed something impossible. A member of their group holding the monster in his hand and using it. This was not a flash of genius. There was no sudden eureka. It was a slow, terrifying process spanning generations as people became familiar with something that had always meant death. The courage required was raw and immense. Fire burned, killed, and destroyed everything it touched, yet again and again someone, whether brave or desperate, picked it up. Most people get this wrong. The true revolution was not making fire, that came later. The first revolution was keeping it alive. A wildfire is a gift that might appear only once in a season if you're lucky. The breakthrough that changed everything was learning to keep a glowing twig or a bundle of slow-burning bark and moss alive, and carry that ember with you for a day, for a week, for miles. You feed it, shield it from rain and wind, and never, ever let it go out. A group that could transport fire carried a piece of the sun wherever they roamed, making them the most powerful beings on the land. That ember became the single most treasured possession of the group, more valuable than any food, any tool, any shelter. It also created something entirely new in human history: a role. Someone had to be the firekeeper, the person the whole band depended on. For the first time, a person's worth was measured not just by strength, but by what they could protect. We can actually see traces of this in the earth. Deep inside Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, scientists uncovered charred bone and ash from burned plants that date back roughly 1 million years, one of the oldest solid signs of human-controlled fire. At a site called Gesher Benot Yaakov in present-day Israel, dating to about 790,000 years ago, there is evidence of fire repeatedly used in a specific spot. Not random wildfires, but fire intentionally kept where it mattered. The exact dates and cave names aren't the point. The point is the pattern. On the night everything finally shifted, carrying fire from wildfires could sustain a group for an astonishingly long time, years, even generations. But that advantage carried a terrible flaw, and eventually that flaw caught up. Imagine a cold, wet night. The firekeeper is exhausted. Rain seeps in. The ember hisses, shrinks, flickers, and dies. In an instant, the group is thrust back into the old nightmare. Cold, total darkness, and beyond the vanished light, the patient breathing of predators waiting. They cannot start another fire. They can only wait, helpless, for lightning to strike again, hoping nothing finds them first. That pressure, that gut-deep terror of losing the flame with no way to replace it, drove the greatest leap the human mind ever made. Not to discover fire, but to create it on demand, whenever needed. How did it happen? Almost certainly by accident, then by relentless repetition. Picture someone rubbing a stick against a piece of wood, boring a hole, sharpening a point, doing an ordinary task and feeling the wood warm under their hands. It becomes warmer. They smell it before they see it, the sharp, dry scent of scorching. In a small nest of dust and shavings, a single glowing speck appears, an ember born from effort and friction. This is the bow drill or hand drill. Its genius lies in patience, steady spinning, building heat, and a gentle breath that coaxed that tiny ember into a flame. We think this discovery was made not once, but many times, independently, by different people in different places, all driven by the same desperate need. The first person to succeed almost certainly didn't understand why it worked. They didn't grasp heat or friction. They simply remembered the motion. They remembered precisely what their hands had done, and then they showed someone else. They guided another pair of hands through the motion, slower, step by step. Breathe on it, they said, until that person sparked their own ember. That deliberate act of one human teaching another how to create fire was the first true transmission of knowledge in our whole history. Not instinct, not accident, but purposeful sharing of insight so it would survive beyond its originator. It was a revolution you could hold in two hands and give away without ever losing it. Once they could summon fire at will, it ceased to be merely a shield against darkness, and became the most versatile tool the world had ever known. They learned to set whole landscapes ablaze, driving herds of game toward cliffs and traps, hunting on a scale no animal had ever achieved. By holding the tips of their wooden spears in the flames, they discovered the wood hardened, sharpened, and became deadlier. The very first time a human improved a tool with fire. They used smoke to drive biting insects and parasites away from their resting spots. They burned back brush around their sleeping areas, clearing ground, opening sightlines, and removing the cover predators needed to sneak close. This was a human deliberately reshaping the world to suit their needs, bending the landscape to a plan. A first act of landscaping, the earliest home improvement, the moment a creature looked at the world as it was and decided to make it something else. It began with a flame and an idea. Imagine the first night a group of humans gathered around a fire they had made themselves, knowing they could create another tomorrow. After a million years of darkness, after countless generations huddling, shivering, listening, waiting to be hunted, that night the darkness finally receded. The cold pulled back. Predators paced at the edge of the light, but never crossed it. In the center, a circle of faces glowed warm and gold, looking at each other instead of into the black. For the first time in Earth's history, these creatures owned the night. It was one of the most intimate, profoundly human moments in our story, the night we stopped fearing the dark. From that fire grew something our ancestors had never possessed, a place worth returning to. They could no longer stay wherever they wished. Settlement meant being hunted. But fire changed the equation. A defended fire made a spot on the ground safe, giving them a reason to come back night after night. In the truest sense, they had a home. With a home, everything else became possible. Groups could grow beyond a few dozen, gathering around the safety of flames. They could store food instead of eating it immediately, leave tools behind, and trust they would still be there the next day. People started to fill different roles, and right in the middle of it all was the heart, the fire, the gathering point of the little world they lived in. It isn't a coincidence that, many millennia later, the center of our homes is still a warm room where everyone meets. That living room is really a campfire that we have simply roofed over. The biggest change fire caused wasn't in the surroundings. It happened inside the bodies of those early humans. Once they could cook, everything about what food did for them shifted. Cooking breaks food down before it is eaten, unlocking far more energy from the same root or piece of meat than a raw diet ever could. In a flash of evolutionary time, ancestors received a huge fuel upgrade, and their bodies answered. Over countless generations, the heavy, energy-hungry gut that was needed to grind raw food began to shrink. The extra energy that was freed up had somewhere to go. It poured into the most costly organ a body can build, the brain, which started to grow. At the same time, cooked food is soft, so massive grinding teeth and a strong, jutting jaw were no longer necessary. Bite by bite, teeth got smaller, the jaw receded, and the flat, expressive modern human face emerged. Imagine the very first cooked meal, a root thrust into glowing embers, or a strip of meat held over a flame, sizzling and filling the air with a scent no nose had ever known. Every steak, every roast, every burger you have ever tasted traces back in an unbroken line to that moment beside an ancient fire. Something else appeared that had never existed before. Free time. For a million years, every bit of daylight was spent staying alive, and every hour of darkness was spent staying hidden. With a safe fire and a full belly, evenings now held hours when nothing had to be done. In those firelit moments, the human mind finally had room to stretch. A group could gather after dark, not in fear, but in warmth and safety, faces illuminated by the flames, with spare time to spare. Most scholars think that is where language truly took off. Stories began to be told, plans for tomorrow were discussed, the memory of a hunt was shared and reshaped, and knowledge of which plants healed and which harmed was passed down carefully. Picture the first storyteller acting out a great hunt, leaping, crouching, pointing into the darkness, while a circle of faces leaned in, laughing, gasping. That was the birth of culture, the first mythology, the first attempt to explain the stars, the storms, the dead. When someone started tapping a rhythm on a hollow log, or raised their voice in the firelight just because it felt good, that was the first music. It became the distant ancestor of every song you love today. Fire also did one quiet, remarkable thing. It leveled the ground between people. Think of a simple fire surrounded by a ring of people. In that circle, everyone is the same distance from the warmth. That equality helped humans bond, share, and grow together. Everyone can see each other's faces around a fire. No one sits at the head of the table. Researchers who have studied the few remaining firelit societies notice that nighttime conversation becomes gentler, more egalitarian, focused on stories and connections rather than the harsh business of daylight. Physical strength still matters, but it is joined by new forms of value. The man who can coax a flame from a stick, the woman who can hold the whole group spellbound with a tale, the person who knows which leaf will cure a fever. These roles emerge wholly in firelight. Fire also gave a place to the old, the slow, the weak. An elder who can no longer run can still tend the flame, watch over the children, and preserve a lifetime of knowledge that the group cannot afford to lose. For the first time, a life held worth beyond bodily strength. This shift opened the entire planet. Without fire, humans were confined to the warm tropics, unable to survive a hard winter. Fire unlocked the cold north, the Ice Age lands of Europe, and the frozen reaches of northern Asia. Without that flame, our story would have remained forever in the warm latitudes where it began. Over tens of thousands of generations, the steady surplus of calories from cooked food did something no animal had ever achieved. It reshaped us from the inside out. A shrinking gut freed a flood of energy that poured into the brain, allowing it to grow larger and more capable than any creature's brain before. Place the brain of a pre-fire ancestor beside that of a modern human, and the difference is staggering, not just in size, but in what it can do. Imagine holding 100 faces and their histories in mind, dreaming up a tool that does not yet exist, and then building it. Fire did more than feed the brain. It taught it a new trick: thinking ahead. Keeping a fire alive forces you to plan for the future. You must gather fuel before you need it, bank embers tonight so a flame burns in the morning, and watch the sky to anticipate weather. This may have been one of the first times our ancestors had to hold a plan in mind and act on it before the need arose. Previously, life was almost purely reactive, trapped in the present moment. The fire-lit evening quietly became a planning session. Where will we hunt tomorrow? Who will go? What problem did we face today? And how will we solve it next time? Around that fire, the human mind learned to step out of now, and that may be the most powerful skill a mind can acquire. As the mind expanded, so did the soul. Look at the oldest myths of almost every culture, and you'll see the same ancient pairing at their core. Fire and light on one side, darkness and death on the other. That contrast is so deeply ingrained that it feels less like a concept and more like an instinct. It isn't accidental. Fire gave early groups a place to stop, sit, and feel, even the feeling of loss. Among fire-using peoples, we find the first deliberate burials, the first signs that someone said goodbye, that death mattered. The flame became sacred. Think of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and was punished forever for the gift. Think of the eternal flames that burned in temples, the sacred fires no one was allowed to extinguish, and the Olympic torch that still travels the world today. A single thread runs through all of this. Nearly every ancient culture on the planet found a way to worship fire. And woven through the planning, the stories, the rituals, language itself blossomed in the glow of the fire. Scholars who study these patterns keep reaching the same conclusion. The great expansion of complex human language is tied hand in hand to fire-lit social time. Daylight is for work, but evenings around the flames are for telling tales, teaching the young, working out obligations, and the long, winding conversations that bind a community. Fire gave us those hours, and in those hours, the mind ignited, eventually leading to the cognitive revolution, a burst of art, tools, symbols, and imagination that lit up our species roughly 70 to 40,000 years ago. Cave paintings, carvings, jewelry, the first true human culture, all were kindled, quite literally, in firelight. Armed with fire, humanity was ready to do something no creature before us had dared. Leave our African home and venture into a world of ice. Make no mistake, fire made it possible. You cannot survive a northern winter without it. The cold would kill you in a single night. Those who carried the hard-won knowledge of the spinning stick and the patient ember walked into lands no human had ever survived, and they lived there. Picture two groups standing at the edge of an ice age winter, snow already falling. One knows how to make fire, the other does not. One group has a future, the other will not see spring. That is the whole story of our spread across the globe. When fire-bearing humans moved into Europe, they discovered they were not the first occupants. The Neanderthals were already there, skilled, tough, intelligent survivors who had mastered the brutal Ice Age world for generations, and they too used fire. Imagine the meeting. Two kinds of humans face to face in a frozen land.
We now know they competed, lived alongside each other, and even had children together. If your ancestry stretches back through Europe or Asia, a tiny fragment of Neanderthal DNA still lives inside you. Did a difference in how our ancestors and the Neanderthals handled fire tilt the odds in our favor? Scholars still argue about it, and the plain truth is, we don't have a complete answer. But never imagine the Neanderthals as monsters. They buried their dead with care, tended to the injured and the sick, and they, like us, huddled by their fires in the long night, their faces glowing gold against the cold. In many ways, they were almost us. Wherever people carried fire, the world itself changed to suit us. Humans learned to set fire deliberately, burning old growth to drive game where they wanted, clearing paths, encouraging fresh shoots and useful plants to grow. The clearest example is Australia, where Aboriginal peoples practiced careful, purposeful burning for about 50,000 years, shaping the whole continent fire by fire, generation after generation, in a partnership with the land. There was a darker side, too. As fire made hunting more effective, the great beasts began to disappear, the mammoths, giant marsupials, and other megafauna across many continents. Those were the first major waves of extinction that followed humans around the globe. The lingering question is how much of that loss was caused by the fire we wielded.
Then comes the astonishing leap. That modest campfire was only the beginning. When the same flame was turned up and directed, it baked clay into pottery that could hold grain and water. It melted rock, freeing shining metals from the earth. It cleared whole forests so the first farms could take root. Every major technological step our species has taken traces back to that fire.
The campfire became the potter's kiln. The kiln became the blacksmith's forge. The forge became the furnace, and the furnace became the factory. Consider this: the steam engine, the car in your driveway, the jet that crosses an ocean, the rocket that left this planet, all of them are fire-controlled. Each one is a direct descendant of that first trembling ember that was carried through the darkness. Now, travel back, all the way to the pitch-black African plain 400,000 years ago, to the burning tree and the frightened, scattered group. Imagine one trembling figure who didn't run. That person turned toward the flame against every instinct and took a single step toward the fire. You now see what was truly at stake in that step. That moment unleashed warm meals, safe nights, spoken words, growing minds, long migrations across frozen lands, the kiln, the forge, the rocket, everything. What's breathtaking is that this individual had no idea.
They weren't trying to change the world. They didn't know they were the hinge on which the entire human story would turn. They were simply cold, afraid, and drawn to the light. That ancient pull toward fire has never left us. Think about that honestly. When you light a barbecue on a summer evening, stack logs in a fireplace, or sit beneath the stars and watch a campfire crackle, why does it feel so soothing? Researchers have actually measured the effect. Watching a fire lowers blood pressure and slows the heart, calming something deep inside us. That response is hardwired, a legacy of countless generations who gathered around fire for survival and community. So the next time you find yourself by a fire, feeling unhurried, safe, and somehow inexplicably at home, you now know why. That feeling is the oldest one we own. The campfire circle was the very first human social technology, and after all these years, it still works.
Fire gave us everything we are, but it also holds the power to take it all away. The same force that warmed our ancestors, sparked imagination, and built cities, is now the nuclear fire that could end us in an afternoon. And the fossil fire we burn is heating the atmosphere we breathe. The campfire and the climate crisis are the same flame, separated only by time. In a way that should humble each of us, after 400,000 years, we are still learning to control fire. From the trembling figure reaching for a burning branch, to a world that can now produce a blaze bright enough to blot out the sun, the lesson has never really changed. The only question now is whether we learn fast enough and whether we have the wisdom to match the power we extracted long ago. Thank you for spending this time with me around the oldest fire there is. I hope you walk away seeing the flame on your own hearth a little differently tonight. Until next time, stay warm, stay curious, and keep the home fire burning.